Morning, kids. Today it's Tuesday, 14th of April, long distance learning, COVID. I'm here in the classroom. You're not, but I wish you were. I miss you all. All right, we've looked at the 60s. We've looked at, Watergate. We've looked at 70s or 60s, 70s, the music, Vietnam, Watergate, Nixon, all that. Now we want to start looking at the 1980s, but we got to get up to it. Today's lesson is going to look at Ford, Carter, and Reagan, three presidents of that era, and that'll get us into the 70s and into the 1980s where we want to be. I want to take and look at this PowerPoint to kind of show you what I'm talking about with this era, and then we'll go ahead from there, and we'll go ahead and later in the week, your project is going to be taking a look at the culture of the 80s. What was the television people watched? What were the clothes that people wore? What was the technology? What were the sporting events? So you're going to do a project later in this week about that. But today we're going to take a quick look at Ford, Carter, and Reagan, the presidents of this era. Okay. Well, let's start out with Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was born in Omaha, Nebraska. He didn't live here long. His mother was abused, and so she took her young baby Gerald and moved to Michigan. And later on, he's going to become Gerald Ford, change his name and everything like that. But he is an Omahan. We claim him because he was born here. He was a very honest politician. He was respected in Washington. And when Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, is found to be kind of corrupt and has to resign, Nixon appoints Ford. He's confirmed, and Ford becomes vice president. Well, when Nixon resigns, Ford becomes president. He has never been elected. He is our first appointed president, okay? And that's always going to kind of to hang over him, okay? Some things about Gerald Ford, I just got to mention. Gerald Ford, a couple times, was a little bit clumsy, may have slipped or whatever. And Saturday Night Live was a brand new show, and they hammered on him because of that. If you look at the picture down there, you'll see Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live hammering on Gerald Ford. And I've got a YouTube clip down there that'll show some of the way. And I don't know if it was always fair, but Gerald Ford kind of got that perception, and Saturday Night Live really colored it that way. He was a very clumsy man. But Gerald Ford was an honest man, and he really tried hard. The problem that Gerald Ford had, other than the pardoning of Nixon, and that pardoning of Nixon doesn't go away. If you ever watch the '70s show, Red Foreman, the dad in there, there's one episode where he talks, Jerry, why did you do it? He talks about the pardoning, and a lot of Americans kind of reflect that. But anyhow, the biggest problem that Ford had is going to be inflation. Inflation when the prices get a lot higher, when gas costs more, cars, houses, everything costs more. When the prices keep going fast and your wages don't keep up with it, that's inflation. And that's a problem we had in the '70s. Ford is going to try to bring the inflation problem down. If you look at the picture over there, you'll see the button that says win, whip inflation now. And his big plan was to try to bring inflation down. But Gerald Ford was running against a lot of things. So in 1976, when he runs for election, it's kind of a re-election because he's already president, but the first time, he's going to have a lot of things that he has to carry into that election. The perceptions from Saturday Night Live, the pardoning of Nixon, and inflation still being a problem. Running against Gerald Ford is going to be Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was a governor of Georgia, and like nothing America had ever seen. Jimmy Carter, small town boy, not from a rich family. He was a peanut farmer. His family raised peanuts, and he was in the business of warehousing and merchant peanuts. So a lot of the cartoons, very unfortunately, at the time that characterized him showed him like in a peanut farm. But he was a governor of Georgia. But he was different. He was like a fresher. He was different. Heck with it. But when he came in, like he came to Omaha in the campaign and all, and he was different. He was not from an established political family or dynasty like a Kennedy or anything like that. He was not fabulously wealthy. He'd been in the Navy. He was a small town guy, and he was honest. Hell, he taught Sunday school and all. Jimmy Carter was different. He was very honest. Sometimes maybe too much so, but he was really open. And after the whole cloud of Watergate, and even with Ford, people were ready for a change, and Jimmy Carter's going to be elected. I got to mention this about Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter was different. His family was really interesting, and it's going to be like a sideshow to the Carter presidency. Is oh my God, what are the Carters going to do next? If you look on the picture there, there's a Newsweek headline or a thing. It's called Brother Billy. That's Jimmy Carter's brother, Billy Carter. Ran a gas station back in Plains, Georgia, where Jimmy Carter's from. And he used to just love to talk to reporters. And some of the stuff he said, you gotta think that Jimmy was shaking his head a little bit. And their mother, Miss Lillian, would always just wonder about her kids, I'm sure. And if you look there later on, when Jimmy's president, Billy is going. His brother Billy Carter is going to have Billy beer. And if you look at the can there, there's a picture of it down below. Okay, that's the first beer I ever had. It was horrible. My uncle from Georgia shared one with me, and I thought, if that's what beer's like, I ain't drinking this stuff. But Billy Beer, I mean, here you got the President of the States, and here's his brother. And if you look at the beer can, it's really hard to see on the writing, but it says, I don't know, I know beer because I drink a lot, and I think this is a good beer. Billy Carter. That's kind of like an embarrassment. And Billy Carter, there might or might not, I'm not going to spread rumors, none, but there might not have been a case from Billy Carter in the White House. Might have even gone to the Rose Garden and relieved himself. We're not quite sure on that. But his family's always going to be kind of like a distraction with Carter. Carter did get a lot of stuff done while president. The SALT Treaty with Russia. We in Russia have an arms race. We're building missiles as fast as we can. So the SALT Treaty is going to be an attempt by America and Russia to take a look at our nuclear weapons and arsenals and see if there's some limits that we can do, that we can work with the Russia to kind of bring this madness down. You know, how many times do you need to kill a person in the country? You know, when you've got ability to kill everybody in the country 2 point whatever times, it doesn't matter. But this is going to be an attempt to try to slow the arms race down a little bit. And Jimmy Carter gets the Camp David Peace Accord. Jimmy Carter gets the leader of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, and he gets the leader of Israel together. And he brings them to Camp David, which is the presidential retreat, and he sits down and he's able to work between the two to finally get some dialogue happening. Egypt and Israel had a lot of history. Israel becomes a country in 1948. They go through wars in 1948. The 50s, there's conflict. The 60s, you're going to have the 7-Day War with Israel and its neighbors. You're going to have 1973 Yom Kippur War. And Egypt and Israel have fought a lot. Carter's going to bring their two leaders together, and they're going to sign a peace deal. And since this has been signed, Egypt and Israel have not fought another war. There's some tension there, but they have not fought another war. And that is an important thing. I mean, it's huge for the Middle East. Of course, it doesn't mean there's not without problems. Saddam, of course, would be assassinated for it. Jimmy Carter has a lot of plans, a lot of things he wants to do, but there's something that kind of works against it, conspires. The Iran hostage situation. If you look over on the thing there on Time magazine, there's a picture of the Ayatollah of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini. Okay, and there's a picture of Jimmy Carter. Iran had been run by a guy named the Shah, and the Shah of Iran was a dictator, and he was a friend of the United States. Not a nice guy. He had a secret police savak that were not nice guys, but he was our friend. Well, the Iranians and the United States put him in power, really, with the help of the CIA back in the 50s. We put him in power, and we kept him in power. We sold him weapons and stuff like that. Because Iran's got oil, and they're a very important country in the Middle East. They've got a big population, Strait of Hormuz, that they occupy an important area. Well, the people of Iran rise up against the leader, the Shah, that is our friend, and the Shah of Iran has to flee Iran. The guy, again, you see in Time magazine there, is an Islamic fundamentalist, and he takes Iran back to a fundamentalist country. Even today, Iran is a very Islamic fundamentalist country. It's very important to him, even to this day. The religious leaders today, it's Khamenei. Back then, it was Khomeini, and I'm probably mispronouncing it. Are the religious leaders, and they guide the country. Well, one of the things they wanted was they wanted this Shah back. They wanted him back so he would face justice in Iran. Well, we didn't want to give him back. He goes to a couple places, and then it just discovered he has cancer. Well, they want him back, and we're not going to give him back. The next part gets really controversial. Americans, we say that the Shah stirred up the people of Iran, and they took over the American embassy in Tehran. Now, an American embassy is part of our country. When you're on an embassy, you are in that country. So when the Iranians come over the embassy walls and take our people, that is like an invasion of America. To the Iranians, they said, no, 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 we weren't doing it. This is students that are angry, and the students, overwhelmed by this emotion, storm the embassy. Either way, it doesn't matter. If you look at the picture, the Marine guards of the embassy, the diplomats at the embassy, who have immunity, were held hostage by the youth, the crowds. And they're going to be held hostage. Now, they take the embassy November 1979. They're going to hold about 52, I think, Americans hostage, and they're going to hold them hostage for over a year. For 444 days, they hold our people hostage. That is an insult to America, and it's an attack on America. We have to address it. Now, Carter is kind of, he tries to do a bunch of different things diplomatically, but they're not going to move. Eventually, Carter decides to send in the military. He's got to do something because this thing is dragging out. He stays in the White House. Basically, his presidency becomes hostage to the situation, just like the hostages in Iran are hostage to the Iranian people. So he decides to send in the Delta Force. The plan is hatched where we send a bunch of helicopters from an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. They land in Iran. They get everybody in. We land some planes with fuel. We take the helicopters. We take our forces from the helicopters. We sneak them into Tehran, grab the hostages out of the embassy, bring them back, put them on a plane. They come back to America. The eagle flies. We win. We show the world, America, baby. It doesn't work. The rescue fails. As a matter of fact, fails badly because the helicopters that fly, a couple of them are unsafe. The one's got cracks in the blades. A sandstorm comes up. And out of the 8 helicopters, we're down to like 5 or 6. And that's just not enough. As they decide we probably need to abort this, one of the helicopters crashes into an airplane, a transport plane, and it blows up and 8 Americans die. We abort the mission, but America looks bad. Think about it. We've got Vietnam where we did not win the war, and everybody knows it. Now you've got this. America has just a black eye. And I don't know, a lot of it all ending, and I'm not going to say Carter was right or Carter's wrong in ordering this. I understand why he ordered the military too. It didn't work. If it would have worked, he'd have been a great hero and everything. Instead, it doesn't. So when the election of 1980 comes around, it's Carter running for re-election, but this whole hostage thing is going to just overwhelm the race. And on one hand, his SALT stuff, Camp David, and other stuff that Carter's done that's successful are kind of overshadowed by the hostage situation. Which brings us to Ronald W. Reagan. Ronald Reagan is going to be the Republican that runs against Carter. And I got it just for disclosure, Reagan's the first president I voted for. And I got to show you something. One of my students one time asked me, why'd you vote for Reagan? I said, because he was Ronald Honkin' freaking Reagan. And Reagan was a president that I was really impressed with. And so they made that t-shirt for me about Ronald Reagan. But Reagan's the first president that I voted for. And really what he was saying to America was, the hostage thing, it didn't work. Take a look at me. I'll bring you a new day in America. And Reagan projected a strength. He was a guy who projected strength against the Russians and everything like that. And he gets elected. Now, the day he gets elected and he's going to be sworn in, Iran releases the hostages. Now, were they doing it just to embarrass Carter, who they were upset with, or because they're afraid of Reagan? I don't know. But what happens is it does. Now, a little background on Reagan. He had been an actor. His big movies were with the chimpanzee called Bedtime for Bonzo. He was an actor. He became active in the union, and then he gets elected in union positions. He becomes governor of California, and he's a fairly good communicator. He knows how to talk to people. And he's very conservative, and he turns the South Republican. Pretty much after Reagan, the South is going to be, till today, the South is a very solid Republican basis. Before this, the South had always been Democrat, like under LBJ and in the 60s. The South was Democrat. Today, the South, kind of in elections, it leans more Republican, it seems like. And Reagan is kind of the way that happens. In the two elections that Reagan runs in the 80s, he does very, very well in the South. So it's been said that he turns the South Republican. Now, Reagan takes a hard line right away against Russia. He calls the Soviet Union the evil empire. And once while he was joking, I think it was like during a press conference, he joked something about, is this microphone on? I think I'll solve the Russian problem. We're going to turn him into a parking lot. Well, it was just a gaffe, whatever the exact words were. But that's a message that if you're Russia, you do get also that this is a new president. And then if you look at the picture here, I love this picture. He announces that we've got this thing called the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, where we're going to take and develop a new weapon to minimize or get rid of the Soviet missiles. We can take care of those missiles that are shooting at us, intercontinental ballistic missiles, by using something called lasers. Those of you that remember Dr. Austin Powers, Dr. Evil, lasers. Well, that's what we're going to use. Well, the movie of the era had been Star Wars. Star Wars was huge, okay? And you have all the sequels. Well, this becomes basically nicknamed the Star Wars defense thing. I mean, we're going to use lasers. And this scares the crud out of the Russians. They spent a ton of money to try to develop this and that. In the end, we really didn't have an effective laser barrier. But we just said we did. And I think in a way, that puts a lot of pressure on the Russians. And Reagan rebuilt the military. I was in the military then. I was a sailor then. And I'm telling you, during the Reagan years, we got more vessels, we got more equipment. He rebuilt the military. And, after Vietnam, we let things slow down. But in the 80s, under Reagan, we rebuilt things back up. Now the Russia tries to keep up with us. And in the end, that's going to put a strain on their system. And communism will collapse after Reagan leaves office. And a lot of people tie the collapse of the communism to Reagan and a lot of the things that he did in the 80s. But again, I was in the military then, and we loved Reagan. And again, not apologizing for what I am or what I said, but when I was in the military under Reagan, there was a lot of pride and a lot of things that, after Vietnam and after the fiasco in Iran, there was a lot of people that weren't sure. But you know what? We start feeling proud of ourselves again. And there was a little island in the Caribbean where the Cubans were trying to build a base on it, and we invaded. We took it over. We felt good about ourselves, We start thinking, hey, we can do things. The island, by the way, was Grenada. Now, there is a problem during the Reagan presidency, Latin America. Cuba, Castro, communism, when we talked about the Bay of Pigs and stuff, now you've got this spreads to Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the family that had run the country, the Somoza family, a bunch of dictators, we had kind of backed them, but they were not nice people. And as the people and as the communists come to Nicaragua and start, complaining and people rising up, the government kind of overreacts, and you get a civil war that breaks out. Okay, the people in Nicaragua that were communists were called the Sandinistas. They overthrew the dictatorship that had been there. And these guys take over the country. And again, they're going to be modeled by Cuba, and they're going to be closely connected with Cuba. And they're going to take over Nicaragua. Now, communism spreading is not a good thing because America has had the Truman Doctrine and everything we've said, we're going to resist communism spread. Now, this isn't in Asia like in Korea or Vietnam. Now, this is communism spreading in America, in our hemisphere, just south of us. And just like the domino theory, who's to say it's not going to hit Honduras next, Mexico or whatnot, El Salvador. Hey, wait, it does spread from Nicaragua to El Salvador. And so we in the United States start thinking about this. The people in Nicaragua who are not happy with the Sandinistas and all the changes that they bring ask us for help. And the CIA starts backing them. These people are called the Contras, the Contra revolutionaries. So you got the Sandinistas, who are the people that take over, and Daniel Ortega, and they're going to be communist, closely tied with Russia and Cuba. The Contras are going to be the people that we back against them. Now, in this war, as in every civil war, things happen. People killed, there's going to be atrocities, and it gets controversial. All right. When it's discovered that the CIA is kind of helping this, people get worried. They don't want another Vietnam to happen. So something is passed called the Bolin Amendment. And the Bolin Amendment basically says that we cannot send weapons to the Contras. And the Contras had been involved with some really bad atrocities. So it's one of those things where we're trying to limit it, and we don't want another Vietnam. All right. But Reagan, that Cold War warrior, doesn't want this to become a domino thing. Now, when we talked about Vietnam, we talked about something called plausible deniability. That's where the president can say, I want this done, and it goes between layer and layer and layer, and someone else does it, but nobody knows exactly how it gets done. That way, the president can plausibly deny if anything goes wrong that was illegal. He can say, oh, I didn't want that. Plausible deniability in Watergate. Plausible deniability in the Iran-Contra scandal. Because the message gets done, we want to take care of this. So it goes through Admiral Poindexter, head of CIA, who, if you look at the picture here, there's a Marine Lieutenant Colonel by the name of Oliver North, and he says, take care of the problem. Okay, Oliver North, take care of the problem. Well, Iran has got a bunch of weapons that America had given the Shah, and they need spare parts and stuff. So what North comes up with is an ingenious plan. It really is. Let's sell parts and stuff to Iran that they need. We'll take that money, launder it. Of course, we go through Israel. We'll launder it, give that money to the Contras in Nicaragua, and boom, hey, they get help, and we get what we want, but it's not like we're doing it. But they get caught. It all hits the fan. If you look, there's a YouTube video there I want you to watch. I'll put it on the classroom. There's a show out there called American Dad. American Dad is a very interesting show. But one of the American Dad episodes, the guy sings a song about Ollie North and tries to explain to his son who Ollie North was and what the scandal's about. I think it's the easiest way of ever to think. I've got a link right here, but I'll also put it on the classroom assignment so you can see what the Iran scandal was about. And it's really controversial. Just like the Watergate scandal, we had hearings all summer long and everything like that. The same thing happened here. And if you look at the thing, there's Oliver North testifying. North testifies that he was given orders, and this is what he did. And he was proud of what he did because he was against communists. Ollie North, a lot of people considered an American hero for doing this, even though he did break the law. Luckily, in the process, it gets drawn out. Reagan is not looked at it in a favorable light. But Admiral Poindexter, the leader of the CIA, dies. People in the end, Oliver North's wrists are slapped. In the end, it kind of goes away. But it could have been worse. It just didn't get worse. I think by that time, the American public said, not another Watergate. I ain't sure. But the Iran-Contra scandal is the one big scandal of Reagan's presidency, okay? And that's the one thing that really colored his presidency about that. And even to this day, there's a lot of people that take a look at the scandal in different ways. A lot of people say that what North did in Nicaragua was important to fight communism and American interests. Other people say, hey, you broke the law, you can't break the law. Congress passed the law, you have to follow law. And that whole episode, it goes on. But I want you to watch the American Dad episode. Another important part of Reagan's presidency, Reagan is shot. Ronald Reagan, his nickname was the Gipper, when One for the Gipper was a movie he was in, was coming out of a hotel, and outside was a deranged man by the name of John Hinckley Jr. There had been a movie out there called Taxi, or Taxi Driver, something like that, with Robert De Niro, and in there he plays this crazy guy who wants to impress a girl, Jodie Foster. And so he plans on assassinating a leader. Well, Hinckley has a fascination with Jodie Foster, and so he decides to impress this actress who's never heard of John Hinckley Jr. He decides to shoot the president, gets a gun, and shoots the president. If you look at the pictures there, 1, 2, 3, one, Reagan comes out, gunfire, Reagan is hit. And Reagan is not the only one hit. A policeman and Reagan's press secretary are also hit. Reagan, with a bullet in his chest, is raced to the hospital. But Reagan is something else. And again, I apologize, it's just my opinion. I always like Reagan. Reagan had a great sense of humor. He knew how to communicate with people. Supposedly, right before he goes under the knife, he looks up at the doctor and says, "Doc, I hope you're a Republican." You know, it's kind of a way of breaking the mood. And you know what? A couple months after Reagan's shot, he's back in the White House. He's back in the Oval Office. I mean, he took a bullet. It's kind of like Teddy Roosevelt taking a bullet when he's running for president as a bull moose and finishing the speech. I mean, that's old school. You know what I'm saying? Hinckley, of course, is put in prison or put in institutions, and Reagan survives. Part of the Reagan is shot thing, Brady, James Brady, who was also shot, is going to morph into a movement about gun control, the Brady movement. And there's something called later called the Brady Bills about gun control. People saying, "Hey, there's too much gun violence, and that's going to come off of this." And they want some restrictions so people like Hinckley couldn't get the gun. Now, it's really controversial, so we're going to stay away from gun control and everything like that. Okay, but Ronald Reagan, big part of his presidency, he gets shot, and then he comes back. Reaganomics. Got to talk about Reaganomics. Okay, Reaganomics is another way of saying trickle down. If you look at the picture over there, it assumes that if you cut taxes, reduce government spending and rules, that's going to give people and companies more money, and they will spend that money to invest it, and that will spur the economy. So basically, we're going to cut government spending, we're going to cut government size, we're going to cut government back, and let business do what business as well. But it's called trickle down because, in effect, if you look at the picture, a lot of people looked at it in a different way. They said it's like giving the money to the rich, to the middle class, and then hopefully it'll trickle down to the poor. Now, again, this is very, very controversial, so I'm not going to go in either way, but that's what Reagan looked at. But you also have to look at the 4 pillars of Reaganomics. Look at that, because it's all part of it. Reduce spending with that. Basically, if you reduce federal spending, you can cut the taxes, and you're not going to increase the deficit or anything. And basically, Reagan's policies do lead to a time of growth. You're going to have a growth in American business and stuff like that. But with that, you also have some deficits. It's going to be a problem. So in America, we've done this idea doesn't go away. It stays around. In the Trump presidency, one of the things he wanted to do was to prime the pump to get the economy going even faster. So we had big tax cuts here a couple of years ago. It's basically the same concept. We're going to talk about whether it's good or bad or whether it works or not. This is just kind of what they're talking about when you read in the textbook, Reaganomics. That's what they're talking about then. And it's still around now. Okay, I want to do one more thing. I think Ronald Reagan, though, he was a great communicator. Ronald Reagan could speak to people, and he could joke, and he could talk with people. And it's kind of famous how Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, the Democrat, Speaker of the House, would get together and talk. Well, America's faced with a horrible disaster. The Space Shuttle Challenger blows up January 1986. It had just taken off, and it's just right into the launch when it blows up on TV. And this shocks America. We had problems like with Apollo 13, but we got them back. Well, when the space shuttle blows up, it really shocks America. And there was a teacher on board, and America was sad. And Reagan puts it perfectly into words. I've got the YouTube clip here, but he was able to put in words what America was thinking about the tragedy of the Space Shuttle Challenger, but how we would rise above it and we would move on. And his words were just perfect and captured America. I think in a way Reagan kind of did that. The Reagan presidency, except for the Iran-Contra scandal, was a presidency where America starts building hope again, starts building a new look at itself, and we're moving into a different era. We're out of that Vietnam era. The 1980s lead to the 1990s and the internet and everything like that. So that's where we're going to be next. We're going to take a look. Your projects are going to be in class where you're going to look at the culture of the 80s. While this is all happening with Reagan and Ford and Carter, other things are happening in the 80s. We have disco. Yeah, we have disco. But we have other stuff, and this is a time of in sports and other stuff and technology. We're going to get all sorts of new things. And so it's going to be an interesting time, and you're going to do a project on that. This just gives you the political background. Now we'll take a look at the thing. So, kids, we'll move on from there. I wish you were in the classroom. I wish we could talk. I wish I could hold up a can of Billy Beer and show you, or I could show you some of these videos in person, but we're going to have some links there for you to actually see. By the way, the can would have been empty. It's not full or nothing. But we'll get into the 80s, and then we'll get into the 1990s. Another weird time in American history. Desert Storm and MC Hammer. All right. Anyhow, hope everything's going well with you. On Classroom, I'll have a look in the class on the textbook so you can look at the pages to get more information to fill this out. And then we'll get you later going in this week about your project where you look at the culture and we take a look at the important movies and everything of that time. Take care. I hope you kids are being safe. Miss you.